Shalom and welcome to Editor's Note. I'm Yair Pinto, and together with me, as always, is Jonathan Hassan, my good friend for, I think, more than 20 years, and TV7's editor-in-chief. So, good to have you here with me today.
It's a blessing as usual.
And, today we have big topics. We have, of course, the Ukraine-Russia crisis. Some people call it already war. And we really would like to understand what's going on there. But before we dive into all this, stuff, let's pray and ask God to lead us and to bless this program.
Absolutely. Before we do so, we have a team in Ukraine that is working there, as you know, with our staff residing in both in Poltava and Kiev and other places. They're there. I had a conversation with the director in Ukraine and the Russian TV7 channel, which dubs TV7 Israel News into Russian and other programs as well. At this stage, they still didn't have contact with our staff because of the situation there. So we will keep them also in prayer for their safety. We know that God is our protector. He takes care of us, and ultimately standing side by side with the believers also in Ukraine, also in Russia, and in the entire region. We need to pray for all sides. This is a game of thrones, okay? This is a struggle of power on a global scale. This regional development, if I may call it this way, is just one layer out of many layers and many aspects, but we will dive deeper into those later. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's glad to hear that they are safe, and since last you heard from them that they're doing well, but we really want to lift them up in prayer. And if you could please join us back at home, we want to pray for the people of Russia, for the people of Ukraine, and for the people of the world. Avinu Shebashamayim, thank you that you're in control. Thank you that you're in control of all these big conflicts. And we know that in conflicts of nations, usually the people who get hurt are the individuals, the small people who just want to live their lives. So we would like really, in these hard times, to ask you to reach these people that are searching for safety, for security, for something stable to rely on, and that they will find you, because you are our rock, you are the Prince of Peace, and you're in control of everything that is happening. So, God, we also like to pray for TV7 team in Ukraine and the rest of Europe, as well as here in Israel. We'd like to also ask you to join us here in this program and bless us, bless the technical team, bless Jonathan and myself, and bless our viewers back at home. B'Shem Yeshua Mashiach. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so, everything online and on the news and all the networks are talking about Russia and Ukraine. Okay, and with so much information, it's kind of hard to understand really what's going on. Maybe you can give us a bit of, a clear understanding of the situation so that we can, know what to pray for.
Indeed. Well, let me start with a sentence that I always come back to, and I've said so for many years, and that is the quote by Senator Hiram Johnson, who shortly before the U.S. entry into World War I stated the following, and he said, "The first casualty when war comes is truth." I always paraphrase it to the first casualty of war is truth, or the first casualty of conflict is truth, but ultimately, when you are tuned in to a news channel in your country, you're basing your understanding and your ingestion, if you will, of all the information that is coming out of the country based on multiple layers that are then translated into a way that you could relate to, that could raise the ratings to a certain degree, the specific stories within the aspects. I can tell you firsthand that whoever has been to war knows that most of what is being said on the screens, it's just false.
Completely different than the reality.
It's different from the reality. In today's day and age, to be fair, there is much information sprout out, thrown out into social media. Much of it is also counterintelligence. So if you think that the intelligence communities in Ukraine or in Russia do not currently work tirelessly in order to shape public opinion in their favor, you're very mistaken. And when I say in their favor, doesn't necessarily mean for you to like them, but rather that you would then trigger emotional perceptions in yourself that may cause you to act towards your own government, towards your own institutions from a democratic perspective, that is. And so when we look at the situation in Ukraine currently and seeing the various images and information coming out of this area, it is heartbreaking, obviously. You know, at the beginning when I spoke to a few people going in, whether they are special operations operatives from different special forces units from Europe or elsewhere, they all said, you know, we hope it doesn't get too nasty, because war is always nasty. It doesn't matter how much you hope that there's not going to be the so-called collateral damage. There is already collateral damage.
Of course, yes.
The moment you throw sanctions on Russia, the number one exporter of natural gas to Europe and to the greatest economies within Europe, it's going to impact the cost of living of each and every one living in Europe, in the United States, and elsewhere. Okay, so we need to keep things in perspective to understand that there are greater powers in play here. We need to understand that the war has always consequences, not only on the countries that are facing those wars, but on the entire world, especially when superpowers are involved.
Yes, and here, you know, usually we focus on Israel and the Middle East, but also we focused on events that have direct or indirect implications on the peace of Jerusalem and Israel. So, you know, Russia, Ukraine, okay, it's Europe, it's a bit far from Israel, but how does this thing affect us? Maybe we can put a map of Europe, and we see how far is actually Israel compared to Russia and Ukraine.
Indeed, Yair. Well, we're talking obviously about Russia, which is the largest territorial contingency, a sovereign contingency in the world. Okay, so we're starting here. This is Russia on this side. Here's Ukraine, and we see the border with Georgia. Of course, we remember the war in the mid 2000s when there was quite the intensive war between Georgia and Russia. Then under that, we see Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey being a very big landmass itself, then Syria, then Syria and Lebanon for that matter, and only then we're talking about
So
Israel.
it is pretty far with a bunch of countries between us.
It is pretty far. However, if we go to our maps, our regular map of our region, which we use on TV7 Israel News, and the data of or the database or the storage of maps is going.
We are working a lot on our maps. Yes,
indeed. But we can really see that Israel is bordering Syria on the north on a very small strip of land. Now, from Israel's perspective, its border with Syria is its border with Russia. Okay, Syria, for all intents and purposes, from its strategic perspective, is under Russian control. Moreover, there are Russian MPs, military police, patrolling the area, okay, along the border with Israel. So there is a Russian force across the border that ensures, for its own interests, that the Iranians will stay at bay as much as possible, that there won't be any clashes with Israel, to keep the calm, to keep the peace as much as possible. And they are from an Israeli perspective, they are a constructive force in Syria.
Because they also have military bases inside Syria.
Indeed, in Tartus, in Latakia, hot water beds, of course, we call them, on the side of the Mediterranean Sea. So they also have interest there. They have energy research and drilling contracts that they are seeking to extract gas from the exclusive economic zone of Syria. So when Israel looks at the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, it looks at it from a few angles. One angle is there's a large Jewish community both in Russia and in Ukraine. This is number one.
Yes.
Number two, when it looks at Russia specifically, particularly, it also looks at its northern border and it sees Russia as its neighbor.
Also, we have a coordination mechanism with Russia.
A deconfliction mechanism, indeed, to allow us freedom of operations. But this is also a Russian interest. Okay, this goes both ways.
Okay.
Whoever tells you otherwise doesn't really understand military affairs. But for us to understand the Israeli position, Israel is currently in a very tricky situation. Of course, we have much business, both in Ukraine, also in Russia. So there is a lot of links, many links, that establish a strong connection between the Eurasian area, which includes also the Baltic states and other states in the region, to Israel and vice versa. It goes both ways. Now, with that being said, Israel is linked to the United States.
Yes.
Okay, it's linked to NATO. The number one priority of the state of Israel from a diplomatic perspective is the United States. Number two, Germany. Okay, this might surprise people.
More economically speaking, right?
Economically speaking, from a German perspective, Israel is treated with gloves of silk. From a German perspective, Israel has special status because of the dark history of the Holocaust. So the Germans are committed, doesn't matter left or right. The majority of Germans, and I'm talking about the vast majority, are committed to the security of the state of Israel and to that of the Jewish people. So we see also a strong connection on that front, which provides Israel, obviously, with a strong backer within the European Union, okay, which is not necessarily the most friendly towards Israel for other reasons.
So Israel has a lot to gain if it aligns with the United States, with Germany, with NATO, compared to Russia. But it also, on the other hand, has a lot to lose if she opens a front or sides against Russia.
What did Defense Minister Benny Gantz repeatedly say? Also, those who win wars lose. They lose, for us who lost friends in the military, who lost family in the wars here in Israel, and also others currently watching at home who lost their comrades, their brothers in arms, if you will, or sisters in arms, in different conflicts. Ultimately, we know this loss, and we can relate to the challenges that it poses to societies. Wars are devastating. There are no good wars. All wars are fought for specific interests, and ultimately, the security of your citizens and stability is also an interest. Okay, so it converges within that aspect. But ultimately, when we look from a perspective here in Israel, we cannot openly come out and say, okay, we're going to support Ukraine or we're supporting the Russian stance. No, it's called realpolitik to a certain degree.
What is the official response of Israel?
So the foreign ministry, and I actually printed it out beforehand, it's Diplomacy 101. Okay, so it says as follows: Israel shares the concerns of the international community regarding the steps taken in eastern Ukraine and the serious escalation in the situation. Israel hopes for a diplomatic solution which will lead to calm and is willing to help if asked. Now, this is an somewhat overstep. Many people suddenly looked at this and they said, oh, Israel supports Ukraine. Well, it does support Ukraine, but it also supports its relations with Russia. So it said the following: Israel supports the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of Ukraine.
Okay.
Okay. Now, it's quite interesting that in Hebrew it says even more. It says the entire territorial
Okay.
integrity.
That
However,
is open for interpretation.
it is open to interpretation, as I often do, or often daily do. I was speaking with Amir Oren and other of our colleagues with regard to, okay, what does this mean? What is the terminology used? Where can we look at it from different angles? And one of the points that came up was the fact that, well, that's great. The statement is brilliant. It maybe makes the Ukrainians happy here. They're speaking about us, but he didn't write, speaking about the foreign minister, didn't approve any word named Russia. So there was no mention of Russia at all. And moreover, Putin respects the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Yeah, absolutely. Now, his interpretation might be very different than what the president of Ukraine or the president of the United States or any other world leader may interpret. But ultimately, each one has his own narrative, each one has his own interests, and each one will package the way they act towards a certain reality in their own interests very, very in front of their eyes, okay? So this needs to be kept in mind.
That's interesting. So basically, Israel wrote a statement that will make everybody happy, not mad. Then we can still be friends with both sides and playing both games.
Again, also Ukraine, also the United States, also Russia itself, everybody understands the unique situation Israel is currently in. And there were some reports of Ukraine being angry with Israel, that it's not more vocal. I'm very sorry, but the deputy foreign minister of Ukraine visited Israel during the whole situation, before the hostilities actually escalated. And from what I hear, they voiced understanding, towards Israel's position. And ultimately, if they don't understand our position, there was much anger in Armenia at the time when it was in conflict with Azerbaijan over Nagorno and Karabakh. But ultimately, when you try to entice your public against another country for having good relations with your enemy, while at the same time having good relations with the enemy of that country you're enticing against, I'm very sorry, but that doesn't work. And that doesn't touch on the emotions of leaders, because there is no emotions in diplomacy.
It's interests.
It's interests, because interests means that I take care of my people. I take care of my nation. I take care of my country. Now, they may be selfish, but ultimately, when you need to take care of people who every day want to go to work, to take care of their families and their circles, ultimately, society is circles of friends, united with a certain contingency in the past. Today, it's a more pluralistic aspect in many countries. But ultimately, those circles, we need to also understand that many of those circles, be they in Ukraine, be they in Russia, many are believers. And many are our brothers and sisters in Christ. So we also need to remember that. And when, I was speaking with our research assistant, who is helping very much with Europa Stands, who is resides in Moldova. And she communicated with some person who visited about, the situation. And she said, yes, we need to pray for Ukraine, and I'm fasting and praying for Ukraine right now. And then she said, yeah, we need also to pray for the Russians. If you regard them as your enemies, God calls us to pray for Russia nonetheless.
Yeah.
And the lady immediately lashed out at her, saying, no, I cannot pray for Russia. I'm very sorry, but that's unbiblical.
Yeah, it's very hard. I know this from here in Israel, that we were called to pray for our enemies, and then we grew up, both of us here, during the Intifada and the bombs exploding, and then at the congregations, the churches, we were taught to pray for the enemies, and it's very hard to pray for somebody who just tried to blow you up.
Absolutely.
Going to school. But going back to the situation in Ukraine and Russia, so far the United States enforced some sanctions on Russia, economical sanctions, basically blocking Russia's ability to sell oil. And this affects directly Iran, which also goes together with the situation of the nuclear deal. Maybe you can give us, connect these dots for us.
So in the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury, the statement that they released, it actually said the U.S. Treasury imposes immediate economic costs in response to actions in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And we reported on this, obviously, last week because of one element, which includes two components. Two of the oil tankers that were sanctioned were already under sanctions. Okay, they were under the sanctions against Iran because the Linda and Pegasus, those two vessels, one of which, by the way, has been at port in the Phosphorus in Turkey for almost 6-7 months, and we've been monitoring those vessels for quite some time, because those vessels, very much like is happening from Iran to China, to Venezuela, to other places around the world, it is shuttling crude oil against U.S. sanctions, despite talks taking, place in Vienna, despite the fact that sanctions are still in place against Iran's oil and gas exports and so on. They have been transferring oils quite freely. They have mechanisms in place. And those two vessels that were now sanctioned as part of the Ukraine situation were already sanctioned under
the Iran
situation. Yeah. So there is a lot of games. They chose those vessels with clear understanding of how this plays out, and to do so within a complex reality. It seems that everybody are playing their games, and ultimately this also indicates and provides somewhat of a understanding of to what degree everything is connected. Because ultimately, right now, the negotiations taking place in Vienna, they're somewhat stalled, but there are still conversations taking place. There are implications that are going to also project towards Iran, towards Syria. Things may get rough in Syria. By the way, the Iranians are going to utilize the situation where the whole world is focused now on Ukraine and Russia to basically use the fact that the attention is diverted to try and transfer more weaponry. They already have new contracts with terrorist organizations throughout the region, throughout Africa, throughout South America, in order to further its interests at a time when the accountability is diminished.
Yes. And I'm sure that, Israel has its eye on these, intentions and the movements that go on their borders.
Absolutely. So Israel is closely monitoring everything that is happening. There are many events taking place. We can also see beyond Israel. There's more understandings between Israel and its Gulf partners on the necessity to cooperate more deeply with even Saudi Arabia is more active together with the United Arab Emirates. Of course, there are different politics taking place there. But many things are happening right now. We may see an escalation in the region, a word that keeps repeating itself: miscalculation. When wars occur, tensions are high, and therefore miscalculation is significantly more likely. So we need to keep this in mind and understand that we have a responsibility as believers to pray for the situation, to stand up for our brothers and sisters, to understand that the Game of Thrones between leaders, it's wrongly translated in Hebrew. It says Misrakei Hakes, the games of throne, one throne. In English, it is a game of many thrones, because these are world leaders vying for power, vying for dominance. After 30 years, since 91 till 2001, the United States was the undisputed hegemon of the world, the Rome of the 21st century, as the academia defines it. We need to understand that there are other superpowers at play who view their diminished economy at this stage as only a temporary respite. So they will return and bring their agendas and their narratives to the way the Russians look at the situation, the way the Chinese obviously look at the situation. Each one have their own tactics, their own strategies at play.
Long-term plan, short-term plan.
Absolutely. By the way, also the Iranians, also the Turks, also many countries around the world see themselves as a viable contender. So nonetheless, one thing we can always keep in mind: God is in control.
Definitely.
And that is something that is encouraging for us as believers, and praise God.
Hallelujah. So really, thank you, Jonathan. We ran out of time again. And thank you to all of our viewers. Please pray for the situation, understand what's happening, and join us again next time for another episode of Editor's Note.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.